I've always believed that every man deserves one place in this world where he can breathe without someone standing over his shoulder, clipboard ready, pointing out how his fence isn't the approved shade of beige. For me, that place was my family farm. 5 decades of sweat, storms, cattle, good seasons, bad seasons, and a whole lot of mud. My dad built this place long before anybody dreamed of turning the surrounding land into a suburban utopia with matching mailboxes and people named Tiffany and Chad, who complain if a lawn grows half an inch past acceptable community standard. I served 8 years in the Army. When my father passed, I came back and took over the farm. I rebuilt the old barn with my own hands. I planted trees. I replaced the attic insulation during the hottest July heat wave Texas had seen in years. My life was simple. Wake up before sunrise, feed the animals, drink coffee while watching the light hug the hills. Peaceful, predictable, mine. Everything stayed that way until the HOA arrived. Technically, they called themselves the Western Creek Community Association, which sounded like a cult, but with more bake sales and paperwork. They built a polished suburb across the road. Cookie-cutter houses that looked like they'd been printed on a factory line, with lawns so identical it was like staring at a computer simulation. At first, I didn't pay attention. Their world and mine did not overlap. At least, I thought so. My land was listed as an independent agricultural parcel. I wasn't part of their neighborhood. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. My dad made damn sure of that when the first developers sniffed around 30 years ago. But one morning, a white SUV rolled up my driveway. A driveway that is clearly marked private property, no trespassing, and, for emphasis, keep out. 3 signs. People don't accidentally miss 3 signs. The SUV door opened, and out stepped a woman who gave off an energy I can only describe as dictatorship, but make it pastel. Platinum hair so tight it looked like it hurt. White shoes that had never seen dirt. Clipboard hugged to her chest, like it contained the nuclear codes. She smiled. The kind of smile a person gives you right before they tell you how you've ruined their life. Good morning. I'm Karen Silvers, president of the Western Creek HOA. She said it like I was supposed to applaud. I wiped my hands on my jeans. John Miller. This is my land. What brings you out here? Karen looked around like she was touring a zoo enclosure that smelled funny. Our community has standards, she said, and we've received several concerns regarding aesthetic issues coming from your property. Aesthetic issues, I repeated. Are you talking about my cows or my barn? She ignored that. Your structures are visible from our community. The HOA board would like to offer you a voluntary membership, just to help maintain harmony and cohesion in the area. What does that mean in English? She brightened. It means you'd follow our guidelines, approve changes with us, pay modest dues. Ah, there it was. Pay to exist. I kept my voice steady. My farm isn't part of your HOA. Check county records. This land predates your subdivision by half a century. She looked at me like I'd insulted her personally. All properties immediately neighboring the association are automatically influenced by community standards. Influenced isn't a legal term, I replied, and I'm not joining. Her smile cracked. Just a little. It would be easier for everyone if you cooperated, John. Sometimes, people who resist have a change of heart later. Is that a threat? Of course not, she laughed, a brittle, practiced sound. Just a friendly warning. She got back into her SUV and drove off, slowly, deliberately, as if she expected me to come running after her, begging for a copy of her bylaws. I stood in the dust cloud she left behind, hands in my pockets, listening to my cattle in the pasture, the wind moving through the oak trees, the quiet rhythm of a life that belonged to me and me alone. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that little crack in her smile, was the first tremor before the quake. And Karen? She wasn't done. Not even close. About 2 weeks after our charming little driveway showdown, I started noticing odd things. Not dangerous, not dramatic, just wrong. First, there was a bright orange HOA notice zip-tied to my front gate. "Friendly reminder," it said in bold Comic Sans, "your visible structures are not compliant with local community beautification standards. Please repaint, remove, or shield from view. Failure to act may result in further action." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. I ignored it, naturally. 2 days later, someone left a plastic-wrapped packet in my mailbox, a list of suggested improvements with color palettes and fencing styles. This time, no name, just a sticky note. "We're trying to be reasonable." Things escalated fast. The next week, I spotted a man crouching near my fence with a long-lens camera. I shouted. He bolted like a startled deer. I followed his muddy tire tracks right back toward the suburban side, where all the driveways look the same and nobody waves. That same evening, 2 HOA board members came up my drive pretending to be local assessors. Said they were conducting visual evaluations of boundary compliance. They got real quiet when I asked if they had a warrant or a court order. "Just a neighborly courtesy call," one of them stammered, backing away like I was holding a chainsaw instead of a shovel. Then came the trash talk. Literally. Black garbage bags started appearing near my gate, tied off neatly, dumped right next to the sign that says, "No dumping." At first, I thought maybe it was a lazy passerby. Then 3 bags became 6. One night I caught a minivan pulling up at 2 a.m. A woman tossed bags out the back, giggled, and peeled off. HOA sticker in the back window. They wanted to wear me down. Death by 1,000 cuts. I got the message. But I don't wear down. I dig in. I drove down to the county clerk's office and pulled every land record, zoning map, and municipal development file they had. Spent a whole day in a dusty archive room making copies and highlighting statutes. My land sat outside the HOA overlay. No easements, no encroachment, no conditional annexation. I owned every damn inch outright. I mailed certified letters to the HOA office, to Karen, and to the board. I laid it out in legal black and white. Your claims have no jurisdiction here. Any further trespass, coercion, or targeted harassment will be documented and prosecuted under Texas property law and federal nuisance statutes. Cease and desist. For about 4 days, things went quiet. Then came the drone. It buzzed over my pasture like a wasp with a surveillance complex, zipping low over the cattle, hovering by my barn, doing slow, creepy loops around my house. I shot it down with a paintball gun loaded with neon green, took 3 hits, splattered it like a watermelon. When I retrieved the wreckage, guess what I found? HOA registration number etched on the bottom. Karen showed up the next day, walking like she owned the road. She stood just past the gate, didn't even bother knocking. "Did you destroy a registered drone, Mr. Miller?" I returned it to nature. Might still be stuck in a tree. You want it back, climb for it. That was HOA equipment, community-owned. Well, this isn't your community. You don't get to fly government-grade lawnmowers over my livestock without permission. She pulled out her phone and started filming. We'll see what the authorities have to say. I waved. Let them know I said hi. She stormed off. I half expected to hear thunder. The real kicker came a few days later. A local elementary school teacher knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, all smiles. "We're so excited about your donation." I blinked. My what now? She handed me a brochure. The Western Creek Eco Farm Project, funded by John Miller, local agricultural philanthropist. You donated 4 acres of your land to be used for community sustainability education. My jaw nearly hit the porch. I didn't donate anything. Oh, she said, confused. We have the paperwork. It's signed. She showed me a copy. My name, my forged signature. Western Creek HOA listed as managing entity. And right there, in fine print, all media rights reserved by the Western Creek Community Board. It was a damn land grab disguised as a feel-good initiative. There were already volunteers planting garden beds near the south pasture fence. I asked the teacher, as politely as I could, to leave. Then I called my lawyer. And just like that, this stopped being about fences and paint colors. Now it was fraud. You ever get that feeling in your gut? The one that tells you something big and stupid is about to happen, and no matter how ready you think you are, you're still going to be pissed. That was me, standing in the middle of my field one muggy Wednesday morning, watching 3 massive tanker trucks roll down my gravel drive like they were delivering cake. But there was no cake. There was gasoline. The lead truck had a rusted red cab, and a tank so large it looked like it could flatten a barn without trying. Painted across the side in faded white letters, fire fuel. Highly flammable. Real subtle. I watched from the porch as they rumbled closer, flanked by a black SUV and 2 flatbed trucks hauling what looked like portable pumps and hoses. This wasn't a delivery. This was a damn siege. I didn't move. I just stood there, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick, while the whole HOA parade unfolded in my front yard. Karen emerged from the SUV in heels, out here, in my dust, like she was stepping onto a fashion runway. Her hair was so tightly pulled back I thought it might snap her into orbit. "John," she called out, as if we were long-lost friends. "We're here with one final offer." I didn't answer. I watched the workers start uncoiling thick industrial hoses from the trucks, like they were prepping for a fuel drop in the desert. A few of them looked confused. One guy glanced at the barn, then back at Karen, then at the tanks. I could tell this wasn't in the brochure he was handed. Karen strutted toward me with a folder in hand and a glint in her eye that said she thought she had already won. "These are the revised terms for your voluntary HOA integration. We've included property upgrades, tax incentives, and a temporary waiver on your," she checked her notes, "non-compliant outbuildings." "You brought fuel trucks to my land," I said flatly. "It's symbolic," she replied, smiling like a shark with lip gloss. "You refuse to join the community, yet you use its roads, benefit from its proximity. This," she gestured to the tanks, "is a demonstration of what happens when harmony breaks down." "You threatening to burn my damn farm, Karen?" She tilted her head. "Of course not. That would be illegal. But if this land were to become unusable, say, in the unfortunate case of an accidental environmental incident, it might be considered abandoned, and then, legally, the HOA could petition to assume stewardship." I stared at her. For a second, I was so mad, I forgot how to blink. Then I heard a door creak open behind me. 2 men stepped out of my house, Rick and Luis. Rick was in jeans and a battered army ball cap. You wouldn't guess by looking at him that he used to bust arms dealers and meth labs for the ATF. Luis, calm and slow-moving like a mountain in a tailored flannel, was a former federal prosecutor with a brain like a bear trap. They had arrived the night before just to catch up over beers and brisket. I'd told them about the HOA mess, figuring they'd laugh. Instead, they'd gone quiet. Now they stood behind me like 2 storm clouds in boots. Karen didn't recognize them. She barely glanced their way. "You can't intimidate me, John. This is happening. I gave you chances. You spat on community values." "Lady," Rick said, stepping forward, "you brought 3 fuel trucks onto private property without a permit and just made an open-ended threat in front of witnesses. That sound you hear is probable cause clicking into place." Karen blinked at him. "Excuse me, who are you?" "ATF," Rick said simply. Luis held up his phone. "And I've been recording this entire conversation." That got the attention of the workers. One of them, a lanky guy in a neon vest, dropped the hose and started backing away slowly. Another muttered, "I knew this was sketchy," and followed him. Then, like God decided to throw in a punchline, one of the trucks hissed. Loud. A fuel valve hadn't been sealed right. A fine mist of gasoline sprayed out and coated the dry patch near the south fence. "Shut it down!" someone yelled. Too late. One of the abandoned hoses flopped to the ground, knocking over an empty bottle of water that had been left on a cinder block. The sun hit it just right, like a magnifying glass. I watched the spark catch like it was in slow motion. 1 second, there was silence. The next, whoomph! The grass exploded into flame. Screams. People running. Karen still frozen, jaw slack, folder hanging limp from her hand. One of the pumps on the flatbed began rattling and coughing like it was about to blow. Rick grabbed the fire extinguisher from his truck and ran. Luis shouted something in Spanish I didn't catch, but probably translated to, "Oh, hell no." I sprinted toward the barn to start freeing the animals. Smoke filled the air fast. The fence caught. Dry boards went up like kindling. I heard something pop near the tractor shed and hoped to God it wasn't the diesel tank. All the while, Karen just stood there, coughing, turning in circles, muttering, "This wasn't supposed to happen," over and over like a broken record. By the time the volunteer fire department got there, the blaze had consumed half the lower pasture and licked the side of my old storage barn. The air stank of melted plastic, charred wood, and the sour tang of burned fuel. They managed to contain it, eventually. Barely. I watched the last of the flames die while holding a soaked rag to my mouth and wondering what kind of headline this would make. But one thing was already clear. This was no longer just a zoning dispute. This was war. The next morning, everything smelled like smoke, even my coffee. I stood by what used to be the south fence, boots sunk ankle-deep in wet ash, trying to make sense of the wreckage. My old storage barn, gone. Tractor shed, blackened and blistered. About 40% of my pasture looked like the surface of the damn moon, nothing but scorched dirt and twisted metal. 2 irrigation pipes had melted into the ground like licorice in a furnace. And that sweet scent in the air? Not just burned hay and diesel. That was the smell of someone else's stupidity lighting my life on fire. Karen hadn't stuck around long after the blaze. Once the firefighters had it under control and the police started asking real questions, she vanished. One of the HOA board guys tried to say it was all a community misunderstanding. I told him he'd misunderstood the concept of private property. With colorful language. By midday, 2 county sheriffs were walking the site, snapping photos, taking statements. Luis handed over his phone with the full recording of Karen's little demonstration, complete with her line about the land becoming unusable. Rick showed them the paint-splattered drone from earlier, now retrieved and bagged up, and explained that bringing flammable materials onto someone's land without permission probably violated a few dozen state and federal laws. One of the deputies, a grizzled old guy named Calhoun, looked like he'd seen too many fires and not enough sense. He rubbed his chin, looked out over the blackened field and said, "I'd call this criminal negligence. Minimum. Reckless endangerment if we're feeling generous. I didn't feel generous. Later that afternoon, a local news van showed up. Apparently, one of the firefighters had tipped them off. I wasn't in the mood for camera crews, but Rick insisted it might help public pressure, especially since Karen had just committed eco-terrorism with the same smug attitude she probably used to yell at baristas. While I spoke to the reporter, in my ash-covered boots and soot-streaked shirt, Luis got a call from one of his old contacts in the DA's office. That call changed everything. According to his contact, Karen had recently funneled a chunk of HOA funds, nearly 50 grand, into a private security contract with a company out of state. No public record, no bid, no approval. The company? A shady little operation called Red Shield Logistics, run by a former bail bondsman with a rap sheet that looked more like a novel. The same company that had provided the workers who brought the fuel trucks. That's when it clicked. Karen hadn't just made a dumb move. She'd hired professionals, or at least men who'd been told act professional, to carry out intimidation on her behalf. One of them, the guy who panicked and dropped the hose, turned out to have a prior arson charge in Arizona. Real, upstanding citizen. We handed all this over to the sheriff's office, who kicked it up to the ATF faster than you could say federal offense. Rick made a couple calls of his own, and the next thing I knew, a team in Navy windbreakers was on site, documenting the whole damn thing. That evening, just as I was trying to get the water system back online, one of the Red Shield guys came back. Alone. Skinny, mid-30s, looking more guilty than dangerous. He knocked on my gate like a kid caught egging houses. I didn't know it was real, he said. They told us it was a visual protest. I thought we were just making a scene for the HOA or whatever. I didn't know there was actual gas. I didn't sign up for arson. Luis recorded every word. The guy gave us a full statement, admitted Karen had threatened to sue him if he backed out. He said she even rehearsed her little speech in the mirror before arriving, practicing how she'd sound official. I nearly laughed. Nearly. Next morning, I got a call from a woman I didn't know. Said she was a resident from the Western Creek HOA. Told me, voice trembling, that Karen had told the HOA board she was handling the Miller situation internally, and that nobody should ask questions. She made it sound like you were going to cave in any day now, she said. But after the fire, I just want to say I'm sorry. We didn't know it went this far. That made two of us. Over the next 48 hours, everything shifted. What started as neighborly harassment had exploded into a full-on criminal investigation. HOA members started jumping ship. Social media lit up with aerial photos of the scorched field. Someone uploaded the drone footage of the fire starting, synced to dramatic music, and titled it, "Karen Burns a Farm." Literally. It went viral overnight. I should have been pissed. And I was. But mostly, I was focused. Focused on rebuilding. Focused on the legal war that was coming. And focused on making damn sure Karen never lit another fire again. Not in my yard, not in anyone's. I always thought courtrooms smelled like old paper and bad coffee. But turns out, when you're the one walking in as the plaintiff with half the damn county behind you, it smells a lot like justice. Karen was arrested 3 days after the fire. No early morning raid, no cuffs in the driveway. She turned herself in, all prim and proper, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd been hired off a billboard. Her mugshot made the rounds online by lunchtime. Someone photoshopped a matchstick into her hand and titled it, "Karen the Arson Queen." Harsh, but accurate. The charges piled up fast. Criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit property damage, environmental violations, fraudulent documentation, and unlawful use of HOA funds. By the time the ATF and county DA were done stacking, She was looking at more time than a busted meth lab. Rick grinned when the indictment list was read. Luis just said, "She's gonna flip. Watch." And she did. Not to help anyone, but to squirm her way out of a longer sentence. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, arguing that she lacked intent, that she couldn't have foreseen the outcome, and, my personal favorite, that community tension led to emotional strain, which apparently makes setting fuel trucks loose on someone's land a moment of weakness. While the criminal case moved forward, I focused on the civil side. My insurance had covered some of the damages, but not nearly enough. Between the burned crops, destroyed structures, equipment, and a few livestock I couldn't save in time, the loss came out to over $3 million. That's not including emotional distress, lost revenue, and the little matter of having your land turned into a battlefield. So, with help from Luis and a firm out of Austin that specialized in property disputes, we filed suit against both Karen personally and the Western Creek HOA as a whole. The basis? Joint liability for actions taken under her authority, including misuse of HOA funds to hire unlicensed contractors and attempt to coerce a neighboring landowner. Now, you'd think the HOA would try to distance themselves from her as fast as possible. But no. At first, they doubled down. Released a statement saying Karen had acted with the board's full confidence and was protecting the visual integrity of the community. That didn't age well, especially after Luis subpoenaed their internal communications and dug up emails between Karen and 2 other board members. In one, she wrote, "If we can't get him to sign, we'll squeeze him until he breaks. HOA isn't a suggestion. It's a way of life. And if his property needs to go up in flames for the message to stick, so be it." She actually wrote that in an email, like a villain monologuing on paper. The moment that gem hit the court record, the judge's face froze. The courtroom went dead silent. One of the jurors mouthed, "Wow." I just nodded, slow and steady, like, yeah, that's her. HOA board members scrambled after that. One resigned mid-trial. Another tried to claim Karen had doctored the email, until Luis showed the IP trace and metadata confirming it was sent from her official HOA account at 2:03 in the morning, probably while sipping Chardonnay and plotting arson. Halfway through the hearings, a former HOA treasurer flipped, said Karen had been draining discretionary funds for years, booking landscaping crews that never showed up, ordering neighborhood security assessments that went straight into her own bank account. And that Red Shield Logistics? They'd billed the HOA for over $28,000 under Community Safety Mobilization Services. In short, she used HOA money to hire goons with gas tanks. Public support swung hard. My farm became a symbol. The underdog fighting suburban tyranny. News stations ran interviews. A documentary crew showed up wanting to film a mini-series. People mailed me letters. Some sent cash. One woman sent a homemade pie and a note that just said, "Sick 'em." But the biggest moment came at the end of the civil trial. Judge Morales, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and an uncanny ability to glare like a disappointed ant, ruled that both Karen and the HOA were liable for a combined $4 million in damages. HOA funds would be liquidated, and Karen's personal assets, including her Lexus, 2 condos in Houston, and a wellness retreat cabin in Colorado, were seized. When the judgment was read, Karen didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead, hands clasped in her lap like she was waiting for a waiter to refill her wine. I walked out of that courtroom with the kind of satisfaction you don't get from revenge. It was deeper, colder, like stepping into clean boots after months of walking through someone else's crap. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Rebuilding a burned-out farm is a strange thing. You start with what's left, which isn't much, and work your way up, one shovelful, one beam, one scar at a time. You learn which neighbors actually care and which just like to watch you burn. And somewhere between cleaning ash out of your boots and refencing 100 yards of charred post line, you realize that justice may come in court. But peace you have to make with your own hands. I got lucky. The settlement helped. $4 million split between Karen and the HOA went a long way. Though, honestly, I'd have done it for less if it meant watching her sit in that courtroom, expressionless, as the ruling came down. The insurance finally paid out after the criminal conviction hit. Apparently, acts of HOA terrorism weren't in their standard exclusion list. Who knew? More than that, people rallied. Real people. Farmers from the next county showed up with lumber and fencing supplies. A retired vet from Austin drove out with a trailer full of tools and just said, "Heard you had a HOA problem. Got some time." Even a few former HOA members, now very much ex-members, offered to help. That's the thing about standing up to bullies. It doesn't just free you. It gives others permission to say, "Me too." Turns out, Karen had been pulling her manipulative crap for years, abusing HOA authority, harassing homeowners who couldn't fight back, pushing elderly residents into selling their homes under threat of non-compliance fees. She was a queen in a kingdom of fear, and nobody had dared to knock her off the throne. Until now, I decided not just to rebuild the farm, I decided to make it something more. I took part of the settlement and invested in a new irrigation system, solar panels, and a community greenhouse. I worked with the local ag college to set up weekend workshops on sustainable farming. A school down the road reached out and asked if they could bring kids for educational visits. I said, hell yes. And then came the funniest part. One morning, a county representative pulled up in a county-marked SUV and stepped out with a clipboard. But not the kind that makes your stomach drop. She looked nervous. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I know this might sound strange, but we've been assigned a participant from the local re-entry work program. You've been approved to receive part-time help if you're still looking for labor assistance." "I'm not," I started to say. But then she handed me the file, and I damn near choked on my coffee. Karen Silvers. Apparently, after the criminal case wrapped, she cut a deal. 5 years minimum with parole options, but only if she entered the county's work re-entry program for nonviolent offenders. They usually placed people at city parks or road cleanup crews. But in Karen's case? Well, the court decided the best place to rebuild her understanding of community values was the very farm she tried to burn down. I signed the acceptance form immediately. She arrived 2 weeks later, wearing a state-issued khaki work jumpsuit, hair tied back in a limp ponytail, no makeup, no clipboard. She looked about 10 years older, maybe 20. Her eyes met mine across the fence. "John," she muttered. "Karen," I said, offering her a shovel. "Southfield. Tomatoes don't plant themselves." To her credit, she didn't argue, just walked out to the field and started digging. I didn't gloat, not much anyway. The re-entry program required she work 12 hours a week under supervision. I made sure she got the jobs furthest from the shade, with the most bugs. Nothing illegal, just honest work. Farming has a way of sanding the edges off a person. Maybe it'd do her some good. Word got around fast. Locals started driving by just to see Karen hoeing weeds or hauling compost. One guy pulled over and shouted, "That dirt patch look HOA compliant to you?" I had to walk away to keep from laughing. Luis came by one afternoon, leaned on the fence, and said, "This isn't justice, you know." "I know," I said, watching Karen chase a runaway chicken around the pen. "But it's a damn good start. Some folks say time heals all wounds. I say time just gives you enough distance to laugh at the scars. It's been almost a year since the fire, a year since 3 fuel trucks rolled down my driveway like a slow-motion car crash. A year since Karen Silvers tried to turn my farm into a cautionary tale. Funny thing is, it did become a cautionary tale, just not the one she intended. Today, the south pasture is green again. Took a hell of a lot of work, but the soil bounced back faster than I expected. Nature's good like that. Forgiving. At least more forgiving than some HOAs I could name. The greenhouse is thriving. We've got local schools coming through every month, kids getting dirt under their nails, learning where food actually comes from. I let them name the goats. Big mistake. Now I've got a goat named Kanye East, who headbutts everything with a pulse. We run a little community market on Saturdays. Locals come by for fresh eggs, heirloom tomatoes, and that homemade salsa Rick insists on making, even though it could legally be classified as a weapon. Luis helps manage the books. Says it keeps him grounded after years in courtrooms filled with people like Karen. And speaking of Karen, she still comes by. Twice a week now. Not because she wants to, because she has to. The reentry program renewed her placement. Apparently, the county figured, why fix what's poetic? I don't supervise her much anymore. She knows the routines. Cleanse the coops, weeds the beds, turns the compost pile. Sometimes she mutters under her breath. Sometimes she just works in silence, jaw tight, like she's chewing glass. We never became friends. That wasn't on the table. But she shows up. She sweats. And when the wind shifts just right, I catch her watching the kids play in the herb garden or staring at the goats like maybe she remembers being human. Last week, she asked if she could plant something in the corner near the fence. Just lavender, she said, for the bees. I shrugged and told her to knock herself out. That was the same corner where one of her workers spilled fuel. Go figure. People often ask me if I regret any of it. The lawsuits, the fight, the fire, the whole damn circus. Truth is, I don't. I didn't ask for this war, but I finished it. And I came out the other side with my land, my name, and a damn fine tomato harvest. So if you're out there dealing with HOA nonsense or some clipboard tyrant trying to bully you into submission, here's what I'll say. Stand your ground, know your rights, and keep a fire extinguisher handy, just in case your local Karen decides to go full gasoline diplomacy. Now, if you'll excuse me, Kanye East is trying to break into the greenhouse again.